Conservative parents are pushing for parental rights to protect children from woke ideologies. Leftists are pushing back and accusing parents of treating children like property. Do children belong to parents or to the state? Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. There are many fronts in the culture wars, and right now, parental rights is one of the big ones. Battles are being waged all over the country, but when it comes to parental rights, at this moment, the West Coast is the coast with the most controversy, that is. Take California, where parents are unhappy about two bills they say push a transgender agenda. California, never change. On second thought, actually, yes, please do change. The bills are Assembly Bill 665 and Assembly Bill 957. Both have made it through the state assembly, but not through the state senate. They aren't even law, and they're already stirring up a hornet's nest of controversy. Some say the bills paved the way for state-sanctioned kidnapping and required affirmation of gender-confused kids. Or that California wants to take trans children from their parents. And the bills, along with some similar legislation in Oregon and Washington, do raise a serious question. At what point is it appropriate, if at all, for the state to get involved with a child's welfare? Assembly Bill 665 is authored by California Assemblywoman Wendy Carrillo and State Senator Scott Wiener. Existing state law in California allows minors as young as 12 to consent to counseling or residential shelter services if two requirements are met. The minor must be mature enough to participate and a danger to self or others or the victim of child abuse. It doesn't say who decides if a minor is mature enough to participate. Assembly Bill 665 modifies that law to remove the requirement that the child be a danger or the victim of child abuse to consent, meaning that any minor 12 years of age or older can consent to counseling or residential shelter services for pretty much any reason at all. Parents won't let them throw a booze party? Time to run away to a residential shelter. While the bill says that treatment shall include the minor's parents' or guardians' involvement, it allows professionals to make an exception if they determine that parental involvement would be inappropriate. It specifies that professionals must consult with the minor before deciding whether to get the parents involved. This has made a lot of parents angry. Aaron Friday, a leader of the parent advocacy group Our Duty and a Democrat, called it state-sanctioned kidnapping. And she wasn't the only one up in arms. Local news in San Diego reported that the new bill allows the removal of children aged 12 and up from their parents' home without a court order. And social media was on fire with all sorts of interpretations of the bill. Some claimed that the bill sought to remove custody from parents. The social media buzz led the Associated Press to put out a fact check. In the fact check, AP said that the legislation contains no language that would allow school mental health professionals to remove children from the custody of their parents or guardians. I'm not sure who supposedly mentions school mental health professionals. Even the Instagram post cited in the AP article doesn't. But the fact check got fact checked by Friday. You know, the Democrat who called it state-sanctioned kidnapping, along with another attorney. They wrote, the bill in effect will allow children 12 years and older to place themselves into residential shelters, where they will expose themselves to Child Protective Services investigation and to being deemed a runaway, both of which can terminate parental rights. It is true that the bill doesn't mention anything about removing custody. It's simply left up to the discretion of professionals when to involve parents when minors seek mental health services or shelter. But in practice, Friday argued that the new bill allows children to put themselves in situations where the state could remove them from their parents. According to Carrillo, the bill's main author, the bill makes no change to the child welfare system. It's primarily aimed at kids on Medi-Cal, California's Medicaid program for low-income individuals. The bill does mention Medi-Cal coverage of residential services, but the major changes to existing law have nothing to do with that, which is why many still see this as a direct attack on parents. According to Friday, This bill is essentially stating that parents are criminals that have to prove their innocence to get their child back. A similar bill that recently passed in Washington state allows residential shelters to contact the Department of Children, Youth, and Families instead of parents when a minor shows up, especially if the minor wants a sex change or an abortion. The left-leaning OPB reported it as trans minors protected from parents under Washington state law, which kind of tells you everything you need to know. But back to California. Carrillo tried to assure angry parents, saying, "We would never move a piece of policy that takes away parental discretion to allow children to not have access to their parents." But there's another bill that seems to contradict that. Assembly Bill 957. I'll tell you more about that one right after this break. Welcome back. What happens when a child decides they want to have an irreversible sex change procedure, but the parents disagree? Well, Assembly Bill 957 might make it so the parents lose custody. State Senator Weiner was involved in writing the bill alongside with Democratic Assemblywoman Lori Wilson, who has a transgender child. Assembly Bill 957 amends the state's family code by requiring family courts to consider a parent's affirmation of the child's gender identity as part of the health, safety, and welfare of the child when making decisions about visitation and custody. Wilson said this was her way of drawing a line in the sand against anti-trans laws. In her mind, not affirming a child's gender self-identification is equivalent to rejecting the child and denying their existence.
Then you're essentially rejecting your child. And that is not in the best interests of a child. We should be affirming our children in every possible way and getting them whatever appropriate care they need. And this is saying that you have to include gender affirmation as a part of that.
You really should only reject your children for a good reason, like if they want to get involved in theater or math. Some fear the bill will punish parents for refusing to affirm their child's gender identity and charge any parent who doesn't affirm transgenderism with child abuse. Because of this, some on the right argue that California is losing its mind, which is absurd. California lost its mind years ago. Republican California State Senator Scott Wilk even warned parents to flee California.
In the past, when we've had these discussions and I've seen parental rights atrophied, I've encouraged people to keep fighting. I've changed my mind on that. If you love your children, you need to flee California. You need to flee. I'm born and raised in this state. I love this state. I'm not going to stay in this state because it's just too oppressive. And I believe in freedom, and so I'm going to move to America when I leave the legislature.
Given that California looks more and more like a third world country, I'm not surprised Wilk would say that California isn't a part of America. Proponents emphasize that the bill is only limited to divorce proceedings and that courts would not solely determine child custody on gender affirmation alone. A spokesperson for Senator Wilson said Assembly Bill 957 is not saying affirmation is the most important factor or determining factor. It's one of many factors that the judge should consider while working out a custody agreement. Wilson herself repeated that point as well, saying one of the factors, not the factor, but one of the factors would be the parent's affirmation of a child's gender identity. But at one point, the bill required the court to strongly consider that affirming the minor's gender identity is in the best interest of the child, although that clause is currently crossed out. Critics believe that the bill is just a slippery slope that won't be limited to just divorce settlements. They're also concerned about how vague it is. For example, it doesn't mention any age range for children or define what a parent's affirmation means. The bill also makes a lot of assumptions. It assumes that opposing transgender affirmation is tantamount to erasing transgender children or even killing them, that children know better than their parents, and that children's mental health will improve once people affirm their gender identity, which isn't always the case. It doesn't sit well with many parents that government officials and teachers think promoting transgender talking points is in their children's best interest, which is why many are protesting. Many on the left, meanwhile, see the parental rights movement as dangerous. I'll tell you why after this quick commercial break. Welcome back. In recent years, conservative Republicans have pushed back against moves by the state to promote LGBTQ content to children. Many states have passed parental rights bills, including North Carolina, Alabama, Iowa, Kentucky, and others. These parental rights bills are intended to fight what many call indoctrination. The aim of these kinds of laws is to give parents more say over school curricula and child health care than educators and public officials.
We want freedom, we want rights. 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 Our children, our rights. Our children, our rights. Our children, our rights.
But many on the left oppose the parental rights movement. New Jersey Attorney General Matt Platkin sued school districts for requiring parental notification if students seek to change gender identities. The Southern Poverty Law Center even labeled parental rights groups as extremists comparable to the KKK. If you want to learn more about that, I'll leave a link below. Critics against the parental rights movements argue that policies such as parental notifications for transgender students put students in harm's way in households that wouldn't be receptive to their gender identities. The assumption is that not notifying parents and affirming gender identities are the best ways to prevent harm or even suicides. The critics argue that the parental rights advocates don't really trust parents to determine what's proper for their children. But on the left, many argue parental rights groups are actually just conservatives shoving conservative agendas without taking into consideration the opinions of leftist parents. They say if conservatives really cared about parental rights, then they would respect the rights of parents who affirm LGBTQ gender identities. Keep in mind that this is assuming that pushing back against promoting LGBTQ talking points restricts the rights of LGBTQ proponents. Critics of parental rights argue that parents pushing for parental rights in schools are affecting what other children see, not just their own. As a senior counsel at the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund puts it, parental rights advocates are super selective when they want to support parental rights. They certainly do not want to support the rights of parents that support trans kids, only the rights of parents that don't want their trans kids to exist. An opinion piece in the New York Times says, parents' rights, in other words, is when some parents have the right to dominate all the others. Because telling left-wing parents that they might have to teach their kids some things at home rather than in school is dominating them, right? For many on the left, parental rights is also just an excuse to whitewash curriculum and muzzle classroom discussions over things like sexuality, history, and race. Meanwhile, the LA Times claims that the parental rights movement has distracted from the legitimate serious problems such as pandemic-related learning losses and teacher burnout. Others go much further than that. A senior writer for New York Magazine argues that the right, especially conservative Christians, are treating children as property, like domesticated animals. Because pet owners can call their cats and dogs their children. But if parents try to, raise their children, they're treating them like cats and dogs. You can probably guess that author might just have a little bias against conservative Christians, just a little. She goes on to rant about how parental rights is just a means for conservative Christians to grab state power and impose an authoritarian hierarchy on everyone, and how denial of gender-affirming care is an act of violence. The author even claims that what matters most to parental rights advocates is not whether trans youth will suffer, but if parental grip might loosen. She says, taken to extremes, the concept of parental rights can be dangerous and even deadly for children. I guess it's no surprise that people who think like that believe parental rights is code for child abuse. So what's the conclusion that these people want to make? New York Magazine says that people need to view children as a public responsibility. It's a very collectivist perspective, which isn't surprising since the author calls herself an atheist socialist. Even U.S. President Joe Biden seems to share the pro-state control sentiment.
There's no such thing as someone else's child. No such thing as someone else's child. Our nation's children are all our children.
This leads some to conclude that parents don't have the right to control public school policies. There are several problems with the pro-state control camp. For one, they're doing the very thing that they criticize conservatives of doing, namely pushing a specific ideology that everybody must take as gospel truth. They are also equating taking certain ideas out of schools with banning them outright, because apparently schools are the only places children ever learn anything. And they are pitting parents against children. People with this line of reasoning point to cases in which families have seriously abused or even killed their own children, which is why they keep hammering that the home is often no refuge, but a place of domination and abuse. While it's easy for people to cherry-pick instances of child abuse within homes, you could also make the same argument against public schools. And trust me, there's no end to stories of teachers abusing their students. Just because there are cases of family neglecting their children doesn't mean that it's the norm. Most parents are interested in keeping their children healthy, happy, and well-educated. It's well documented that homeschooled students tend to get better test results than their peers. Thanks to the parental rights debate, plus the pandemic, homeschooling is actually growing in popularity. Parental rights is also largely popular with voters. According to Rasmussen reports, 82% of California voters disagree that a person loses their parental rights when a child enters public school. And 62% are supportive of a law that included parental notification over gender identification, as opposed to 27% against. There's a huge disconnect between voters and opponents to parental rights. Indeed, 91% believe parents, not the government, have the bigger responsibility to raise a child. Even those in support of LGBTQ gender affirmation, like Erica Anderson, a trans woman, thinks parental involvement is essential at every stage in the process, because many adolescents lack the skills for future thinking, planning, big picture thinking, and self-reflection that are necessary for informed decision making. Which is crazy. I know I made all my best decisions when I was 13. Many people assume that government officials and public school teachers are going to be competent and know what's best for their students, but the people who know each child's individual needs, medical histories, and experiences best are usually parents. They're likely to invest a lot more energy into each child compared to the average teacher or bureaucrat. And for those who think the government should raise their kids, it's worth asking if they would still think that regardless of the political party in power. So what do you think of parental rights? How far do you think it goes? Leave your comments below. And remember that we rely mainly on direct support from viewers like you. If you want to help us deliver nonpartisan news, all it takes is as little as $1 per episode over on our crowdfunding website, Patreon. Visit patreon.com/America Uncovered for more. Click the link below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.